On January 27, 1959, 9 close friends and 1 outsider embarked on a 16-day journey that would cover 200 miles to the remote mountain of Gora Otorten. This group consisted of 8 men and 2 women. Led by Igor Dyatlov, the crew was well prepared and experienced. Months of packing and preparation had gone into the planning of this trek. Gear was inspected, rations secured, maps and checkpoints outlined. The group even carried photographic equipment with them, 5 cameras in total, unusual for this era. The first few days, the group traveled by train, bus, and even carriage. Their spirits were happy and jovial, and often singing and joking, as good friends often do.
On the day of January 28th, Yuri Yudin, the group's geologist, so to speak, had to depart from the group early. He had been experiencing some serious joint pain and felt he would not be able to safely continue. Saying goodbye to Yuri, the group began their trek up the river Lozva around 11:45 a.m. The snowfall was lighter than the previous year, and all were happy for the warmer temperature of only -8 degrees. Following the Lozva until around 5:30 that evening, the group stopped. Once again, in high spirits as they set up camp, the friends had modified a large 9-person tent for the expedition. In the middle was a suspended stove to warm them. The next morning, the group continued on in -13-degree weather. Following one river to another, the days were long, but the friends pushed on, making camp jovial and lighthearted. The extreme weather does not seem to faze them.
January 30th, the group set out on the bank of the Asupia River. The air was bitter and damp. The ice on the river prevented them from going further, so they used the bank of the river and a deer trail to follow, noticing signs on the forest trees of the Mansi people. Excited by the Mansi, the group continues on, exhausted from trekking in snow that was 4 to 6 feet deep. On February 1st, the group posed for a photo, setting up camp on the snowy slope of the Golitsyokul, singing, laughing, taking photographs, and enjoying the journey. Comrades and friends on a mission. This was the last time they would make camp. They missed their checkpoint the following day on February 2nd, and days later a search party was sent to find them. What they found was disturbing and remains a debated mystery almost 7 decades later. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Rebel Road podcast. This is our mini episode, or as we love to call them, Road Snack. And today's story is one of my absolute favorites. And man, was I hooked when I heard that. It is the mysterious Dyatlov Pass incident.
Yes, thank you for listening and sharing our little podcast here. We are growing every week, and just like our campers, we are pushing through. It's been so fun to see where everyone is listening from. I absolutely love it. We are, again, just a little podcast that has gone global. So we love seeing that. We see you and we appreciate you. And I just want to give a shout out to everyone who has taken the time to give us a 5-star review, and especially those written reviews. Mary and I get so excited when we see those, and we would like to send you a little thank you. So if you would like to send us your mailing information, you can send that to rebelroadguests@gmail.com. We'd love to send you a little Rebel Road sticker in the mail. We've had a lot of fun creating those. And to anyone listening who's not given us a 5-star review, we're not begging it, but we are, if you're feeling left out, and trust me, I think you'll want one of these little Rebel Road stickers. Go ahead and just leave a kind-worded review and send us our info. Again, rebelroadguests@gmail.com. We do only have a few to send out right now, so I guess it's, first come, first to the swag, so to speak. So, Mary, you said we were keeping it chilly in this week's episode, our little road snack. And the weather here, of course, not just here, but a lot of places in the United States, the weather has been no joke. You had quite a few low negative degree days where you are. And I mean, Mary, Are you still up for Antarctica?
Well, it's the wind that's going to get you, and it is windy here where I live, and that has been a very new thing for us to get used to. This is our first winter here in the state that we moved to. But yes, I would absolutely still love to visit Antarctica. But I'm thinking the State Department might deny me. They'd be like, no, that's that Rebel Road gal. She just wants to see aliens and not the penguins. So I don't know, but I'm still down
Yeah.
to go.
Well, yes, you're right. They may be tuning in, and our FBI agents might be listening, but we shall continue. Or, maybe they won't. But from our opening story, we are indeed keeping it frosty with the balmy negative temperatures and a group of friends tromping through the mountains of Russia. And I would absolutely not be wanting to camp in those conditions or even really plan a trip to do it. Maybe I'm more of a glamper, so to say. But it makes sense to ask, why were these kids out there? And I respectfully say kids because they were all in their early 20s. And, the leader of the group, Igor himself, was, only a very young 23 years old.
Yeah, this group was young, physically fit, and very skilled, just ready to take on the world. But they didn't just decide to do a little light camping or leisurely snow adventure. The friends were taking their level 3 mountaineering test. So this is the highest certification in Russia. It demanded a multi-day test of usually over 300 kilometers or about 185 miles. So the Dyatlov crew, they had planned on a 200-mile trek, so they were going a little longer. And it wasn't just about the length of the hike. It also needed to be under challenging weather conditions and rough terrain. So the trip was planned for weeks with checkpoints and estimated return dates. When they missed that second checkpoint, they knew something bad had happened.
That makes more sense. So I imagine they would need to be a level 2 to achieve a level 3, of course. Do we know what that entailed? I just want to lay the groundwork when we get into what happened to the group.
Yeah, that makes perfectly good sense to me. The level 2 certification focused on glacier travel. So ice dangers, Crampton ice axe techniques, high altitude endurance, basic crevice rescue, and self-arrest. So they had to learn how to get themselves out of danger and to help others who were in danger. Their endurance also had to be at the absolute highest. They had to be able to walk 10 plus hours a day in a rough, snowy terrain, and they also had medical training with that. So this training focused on altitude sickness and high altitude safety. So to your point, no, these kids, they just didn't wander into a bad situation. They were alert and rational and well prepared. The only wild card would maybe have been that Alexander, and I'm going to butcher his name, Zolotyrov. These are Russian names, guys, and I do apologize, but they called him Sasha. He wasn't an original member of the group. He was older. He was 37, not clean cut, and he had tattoos. So people were kind of quick to look at him. But I think sometimes people think he just showed up and was like, hey, can I come with you guys? But no, he was actually a replacement for another original team member who couldn't go when they were in the early planning stages. So they knew him weeks before the trip. He was an experienced hiker. He was a senior instructor at a sports base and an avid outdoorsman, as well as a World War II veteran. And most of the hikers kept diaries and logs, and they even kept a group diary. And from their diaries, we know that he fit in very well with the group. They liked him.
Mary, something that you mentioned, and I think maybe we should point out and remind our listeners is this was in 1959. So while, the not clean cut and the tattoos may be normalized today, in 1959, that went against all societal norms. So he definitely stuck out from what that group probably presented themselves as. But what about when Yuri left because of his ailment? Do you think that weakened the group?
No, I think it actually saved his life. And because he did turn back around, he was able to provide valuable insight into the investigation when they did find their camp on February 26, 1959. They were able to bring him in, and he was able to identify clothes and items in the tent and where those items came from and stuff like that. He was really invaluable. when they were trying to piece this back together.
Well, I think we'd better finish the story so we can come back and get into the weird surroundings of this event. So hang on to your boots, everyone.
The night of February 1st, 1959, the group of friends made camp around 5 p.m., enjoyed dinner, and tucked into their canvas home for the evening. The group most likely worked on their satirical newspaper, the Evening Otorten, where they lightheartedly joked about science, proving the existence of snowmen. They positioned their tents and themselves so that their heads faced the mountains behind them and their feet towards the exit. As they prepared to assemble their indoor stove for the evening and climb into their sleeping bags, something happened under the darkness of night and in the shadow of the mountain. Was it a loud roaring boom? Did the snow crack and break from the mountains above? Vibrations shaking the tent? Whatever it was, the group left the safety of their tent and never returned.
When their camp was found 25 days later, on February 26, the mystery of their disappearance only deepened. The tent had been slashed from the inside. 3 vertical slits were found and proven to have been cut from the inside. There was nothing blocking the main entrances. 9 packs were arranged neatly along the wall of the tent. The stove had not been assembled, indicating that whatever happened before they had gone to sleep. And most alarming of all, 9 pairs of boots and warm clothing lay there in the tent. The group had fled the tent at such an alarming rate, they ran into the darkness in negative 30-degree temps and deep snow in their bare feet. They fled leaving blankets and all their equipment behind. A flashlight was found on top of the partially collapsed tent. As the searchers began circling outside of the tent, they discovered footprints, 8 to 9 sets. It formed columns and indicated the group didn't panic and run, but rather formed a single file line and walked towards the forest below.
And this is where the mystery really begins. And I'm going to issue a little trigger warning here, folks. To really dig into this event, we will be discussing the condition that their bodies were found in. So if that's something you can't handle, we'll catch you on the next episode, or you can skip ahead about 5 minutes to the end. The first of the group to be found were the 2 Yuris. We have Yuri K and Yuri D. So remember the Russian names, and I don't want to mess up their pronunciation, so I'm going to go with Yuri K and Yuri D. But they were found not quite a mile from the tent under a cedar tree. Now, both of these men were in their underwear and the socks, and it appeared that their clothing that they had been wearing had been cut off of them. Their bodies showed signs of significant burns, and there were remnants of a small fire having been started. There was also evidence that they had tried to climb the tree that they were hiding under. Human skin and blood was found on the bark. So they were either trying to scout for the tent that they left behind, or they were trying to escape something. Both men had foam in their mouths, which is a sign of a pulmonary edema or fluid in the lungs, which happens when rapid temperatures drops and stress and in high altitude. So that's completely normal in that type of a death. And a piece of the tip of Yuri K's nose was missing. And there were claims, although these are debated, that he had a piece of his own knuckle in his mouth. And so that suggested he may have been trying to bite himself to stay awake or deal with the pain from freezing to death. The 2 men had managed to start a fire, but were too far along in hypothermia to feel it. And so they both died there by the fire, face up.
So now circling from the tree back to the tent where the researchers were searching for the remaining campers, they found 3 more of the individuals that were missing from the group. And those individuals were Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. And all of these campers were spaced out along the line of where the searchers were looking. All 3 of them were found facing the tent and appeared to be trying to return to the tent. Now, Igor was the leader, and he was found closest to the cedar tree about 300 feet from it. And he was wearing a fur-lined vest, a sweater, and cotton pants. Only socks. 1 sock was cotton, 1 sock was wool. And Igor's posture was defensive. And it was noted that one of his arms was protecting his face. And despite being the group leader and a physically strong man, his cause of death was ruled as hypothermia. There were minor abrasions on his hands, but there were no internal injuries, and his pocket watch had stopped at 5:15 a.m. Now, Zena was found 330 meters further up the slope than Igor, closer to the tent, and she was the most determined of the three, having made it the farthest back. Now, it was noted that Zena was lying on her side in the snow, and like the others, she was inadequately dressed for the weather, lacking a jacket and boots. There was a long, bright red bruise on her side in the lumbar region. It was noted that it looked like it had been caused by a blow from like a blunt object. Now, however, like Igor, her official cause of death was hypothermia, and searchers noted that she had a determined expression, and there were signs that she had been crawling through the snow toward the tent until the very end. The third hiker was found a few days later on March 5th, and this hiker was face down, lightly buried under the snow, and was halfway between Igor and Zena. Now, unlike the others, Rustam was wearing one boot on his right foot. And when the autopsy was performed, the doctors found a fracture in his skull. It was just over 2 inches long. However, the bone hadn't splintered, and the injury wasn't considered fatal on its own. And so Rustam also showed signs of post-mortem tanning, and that can kind of sometimes be referred to as orange skin. It's believed that he suffered his head injury either during the initial event at the tent or by falling while trying to climb back up the mountain, which likely disoriented him and accelerated his death by freezing.
Haley, while these details are tragic, so far nothing is really off about the conditions that their bodies had been founded. It can be explained away with the hypothermia and the stumbling around in the darkness and being cold and not really being able to feel what you're doing. But it's the final four that really set the stage for the mystery to deepen. The last four weren't found until the spring thaw, so not until May. And remember, most of the first five recovered were found above the snow. Only Rustam was buried, and even then, he wasn't buried very deep. So the last four, I'm just going to say their first names, Ludmila, Simeon, Alexander, and Nikolai, were found buried under 4 meters of snow, or about 13 feet of snow. They were found in a ravine about 75 meters away from that cedar tree, and the conditions of their bodies were way more alarming. Unlike the others, 3 of these hikers died from massive internal trauma, and the medical examiner compared that trauma to the force of a high-speed car crash. Yet they had no external soft tissue damage. There was no bruising or wounds on the skin that matched up to the bone breaks that was found in their body. Now, Nikolai had a massive skull fracture that had compressed his head. It was so severe that bone fragments had pressed into his brain, and bizarrely, despite the shattered skull, there was no corresponding external bruises or wounds on the skin above the fracture. So this led investigators to believe that he had been subjected to a focused pressure rather than a direct blow from like an object or a rock. And Ludmila, she had 10 broken ribs on both sides, and that pressure was so great that it caused massive internal bleeding into her chest. And when Ludmila was found, she was in a kneeling position against a rock in a small stream, and the autopsy revealed disturbing missing features. Ludmila's tongue and the muscle at the base of it were gone, and so were her eyes. Now, Simeon, he had 5 broken ribs on one side, and they were broken in 2 places. Soft tissue was missing from his left eyebrow and right side of his head, exposing about an 8 by 6 centimeters of bone, and his eyes were also missing. And the final one of the group, Alexander, he was found lying behind Simeon in a position that suggested he was hugging him from behind. So that's a common survival technique to share body heat. He had a distinct open wound behind his right ear that was about 3 by 1.5 centimeters and a strangely twisted neck. And these injuries were noted in his autopsy, but they were not considered fatal. His cause of death was also hypothermia.
That is a lot of gruesome details to unpack in those descriptions. So it appears something startled the group so much that instead of taking the time to even grab their boots, some clothes, they instead cut open their tent and then didn't run, but in an orderly fashion walked single file to that tree line. And that alone, Mary, is a strange detail, but understandable, right? They didn't want to panic or lose each other. And from a survival view, going single file in waist-deep snow, that kind of makes it easier for the next person and the next and so on, kind of making a pass in the snow for everyone.
Right? So they head for the trees, and then what? They start a fire, and then something happens there under that cedar tree. When the final group was found, they realized that they were the ones that had cut off the clothing of the two Uris. They found them wearing remnants of their clothing. They had wrapped them around their feet and around their hands and had also used it in that ravine where they were.
Okay, so then 3 of them, they regain their senses. They are in the best shape and say, we need to get back to the tent. We have no idea how long they were caught in the elements with just a tiny fire before they tried to make it back. And there in the snow, the 3, they lose their lives, with poor Zena literally crawling through the snow, determined, trying to survive.
It's so sad. And so whatever this initial event was that made them leave the warmth and safety of their tent, it had passed. And now they were all in survival mode, right? The 3 were trying to make it back to the tent, and 2 had died, and the remaining 4 were found stacked on top of each other in sort of a den, which was a ravine. So the floor had been lined with branches that had been cut from that cedar tree and some of the clothing that they had cut off the Uris as well. So to make it even more tragic, they had watched each of their friends die. And remember, that ravine was only about 75 meters from the cedar tree where it seems like they all initially gathered when they fled that tent.
So do we know what was the official report on this?
Well, Russia has given 2 causes, and they were kind of both the same. The first was an unknown compelling force. That was the official ruling in 1959, with Russia sealing the case files. And then in 2020, so fairly recently, with pressure, they reopened the case, and they came to the conclusion that it was a slab avalanche that caused the chaos that resulted in the group's death. And so in 2023, an independent mountain guide was up there in that same area, and they photographed a slab avalanche occurring in that area. And so that proved that it happened. So a slab avalanche is just when a little bit of the snow of a mountain breaks off. So not a complete full-on avalanche. Because remember, the tent wasn't even gone or destroyed by snow. It had just caved in a little bit. And another interesting fact is that with all their survival experience, it is odd that they had decided to set up camp out in the middle there in that valley, where an avalanche would be the most vulnerable for them to hit. They should have set up camp in the tree line if they were sticking to strict training. So that makes you wonder, was something in the tree line that made them want to come out into the valley?
Well, some would probably say, pre-case closed, but that is not necessarily the case. Tragic, but not an open and shut case, at least in our perspective. Here are a few of the details. Radiation was found. Abnormal levels of beta radiation were found on the clothes of several of the hikers, specifically Alexander's jacket and Ludmila's sweater. And this suggests that maybe there was some Russian experiments happening in the area. And when a bomb or a sonic weapon was used, this is what caused them to leave the tent. And orange spheres of light were reported in that area around this time, and shock wave could account for some of the internal injuries. And that kind of would make a lot of sense. Now, as for the slab avalanche theory, An avalanche would account for most of the internal injuries, but some say a slab avalanche is too gentle for that to be the case. I guess I keep coming back to, why did they slash their tent open? Was something blocking their exit? And what was the explanation for the most gruesome detail, the missing eyes and tongue?
Yeah, that is the most puzzling thing of all. And there are unofficial reports that Simeon, the oldest who joined last minute, he was found with an additional camera around his neck, and that he was an imposter or an undercover agent. So what was he doing? Did he threaten the group and march them into the forest? Were there other military in the area and it was a chance of bad luck that they camped in that valley that night? We don't know. But as far as for the missing eyes and soft tissue, some people say scavengers, but there's absolutely no additional scavenger evidences. So you don't have the little gnawing marks. Scavengers go for all the soft tissues. So why are their lips still intact and their noses, And some say it was damage from the water. The ravine was very close to the water, and they found them during the spring thaw. But again, all four were stacked on top of each other. So why did the others not have the same condition? Why weren't they missing their eyes? Why weren't they missing their tongue? There were also claims that Dubina's diaphragm was also missing some parts, and that was deep in the body with no evidence of that being cut up. So what they tried to use to explain it, there was always this other counterpoint that made it very unsettling.
I don't know. It is a mystery, and why we are talking about this event, right? But you did say they had 5 cameras, and that was unusual. So did the photographs give us any clues?
Well, yeah. So it said that there were 6 cameras found, with Simeon's hidden one that was around his neck, and only 5 cameras were listed, as well as some of the photo frames never being released. So there's this mysterious frame 33, and it's the final photo on Yuri's roll, and it's a blurred image of what appears to be glowing orbs against a black background. Now, conspiracies suggest that these are UFOs or secret Soviet weapons, and I just got to say, these photos of the group are all beautiful and super tragic to look at. They're laughing. You can see the harsh conditions that they're working in, and the landscape is just really beautiful. And it really is just a photographic diary and just this ominous foreboding of sorts when you look at these pictures. And we'll put them on our social media, so be sure to follow us there.
It really is a heartbreaking story, especially with the photographs. Why did they leave the tent and go so far away from it? If it was an avalanche, wouldn't that have taken out the tent as well? If something was blocking the exit, that would make sense for the cutting out of the tent. But why wouldn't they grab their boots and their coats? These were experienced individuals. They knew what they needed to survive. I just go back to, there was an imminent threat, but then again, it wasn't a blind panic. And simply because of that single file line, it was almost like a planned escape.
Yeah, and that's where I would lay my money, Haley, if I gambled. It seems to me that they snuck out of that tent. Something was wrong. They knew danger was close at hand, and they escaped quietly and very quickly. And a controversial photograph from Nikolai's camera, frame number 17, shows a dark, stooped figure emerging from the trees. And if you'll remember, the hikers saw evidence of the Mansi people. Now, the Mansi people have legends of the Mink, a race of giant supernatural forest dwellers. The Mink are said to be hostile to humans, capable of great strength and known for eating only the soft flesh of their prey, such as tongues and eyes, a detail that theorists link to the condition of the final 4 bodies. Now, could these Mink be a type of Yeti? Remember, they made camp out there on the mountain slope, which is against survival skills. They should have made it in the trees.
Now, Yeti, that's interesting, considering their satirical newspaper they were writing mentioned science proving snowmen were real. And that's a wild theory, but I see, this photo, and it's blurry. It does look like a Bigfoot or something.
Yeah, it does. And Yeti are most often thought of as white, but there are different types of Yeti, and some are actually dark.
Yeah, I don't think we mentioned this either, but the valley that they died in was at the base of the Ural Mountain, or translation to Dead Mountain or Mountain of the Dead. And it just is overshadowing of their fate. And really, there you have it. Some high, strange things in the mountains of Russia. Again, from UFOs, government secrets, Yetis, to even could it have been something natural? What do you think? So let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to keep it weird and pull it back to Jesus. And I've got to say, I would have been calling on Jesus the entire expedition if I'd been part of it.
All the way.
Yeah. So, Mary, we are keeping our boots on for our full-length episode next week, right?
Yep. Haley, you will still need your boots and, I don't know, maybe a scarf. But with my favorite theory being the Yeti threat of Dyatlov, we are going to be doing our first deep dive into a cryptid, and that is, of course, the Yeti. So we're continuing north up the globe, or flat Earth, whichever one you think, almost 5,000 more miles to Tibet.
Can't wait.
Bye.
Bye.